Hey gang, it's KR King of D&D Homebrew talking today about how to use skill checks, when to use them, how to set them. And basically what I'm going to talk about are two elements I think are critical, which is context and negotiation. So in terms of context, I always think of three things. What is the obstacle or action that the players are attempting to overcome or to engage in as an action? What is the environment around that obstacle or action that they're taking? And finally, what is the perceived or actual difficulty of that obstacle or action? And perceived, I mean the players think it's this way. Is it actually something else, or is it pretty much straightforward? And then the second major factor is negotiation, right? What occurs between the GM and the players in looking at the context of this obstacle or action and deciding what factors could be shifted, what the players can do, asking questions about the environment, what do they see, how can they act in such a way to mitigate the difficulty of this obstacle or action. And that negotiation also includes what skills are you going to let them use, what are the attributes if they have to make some sort of raw check. If you're in a Pathfinder setting, do you have to be trained in that? Is there some minimum thing? All sorts of stuff that goes on that you agree to. You make the final choice, but the players get to agree to that. And oftentimes, and this started way back in the old days, especially the old days because there weren't as many rules, when something sort of slips through the cracks, you have some action the players want to take that isn't really covered in the rules. But you also had it in terms of the contextual realities of situations that were covered in the rules. So in the beginning, if you had a stuck door, let's say, you basically, I think now I'm remembering this, one or two on a D6 to push the door open. They were always stuck, right? I think it was one if you were a weaker character. That might have come in later, though. Because what happened was we started, as the players just started playing the game in an environment, they started saying, well, how long has this been stuck, right? Why is it stuck? Is it spiked shut? Is it just been closed so long it's calcified around the edges? Is the frame itself bent? We started asking these questions and you started to modify this simple die roll. And I think this was what happened as the additions of rules became more elaborate, more comprehensive, whatever. The rules started to confront these different contextual situations. And as additions progressed, you started to have skills, right? Because it further differentiated players and specialized them, but also it would help you adjudicate those situations that maybe aren't in the rules. So the players are going to meet the king, and one of them says, hey, I want to make an elaborate dessert to impress him. And guess what? I have a cooking skill. I've put points into that, or however it works. Well, that gives you a much better chance than just the average person doing that, right? And, you started to have classes that were specialized too. The thief being the most famous, perhaps first example, where they started to have skills that were for tasks, right? Picking locks, detecting traps, climbing walls, all sorts of things. And this was based on a percentage. As they went up in level, that percentage got higher. And of course, this lack of rules combined with ability scores and skills and whatnot caused a lot of negotiations, discussing what exactly the players were trying to do and what the environment was and all this stuff. This started this. And then we usually had a die roll on these, because even though a lot of things you don't want to roll for, you don't want to roll for things that are trivial, and you don't want to roll for obstacles or tasks that are impossible. You want to roll for those where there's a question. Well, this is often where this kind of negotiation would arise, because the players felt like they might have a chance, or how could they improve their odds? And so the GM's like, okay, that makes sense. And you'd sit there and talk about all these aspects and then come up with a roll. And for purposes of this discussion, I'll just say a DC. You see different terms in different RPG systems, but basically what that does is set a base roll on, a D20 or a D100 or whatever it is in the system that the players either have to get under usually, but it can be there's different systems for these, right? And this, of course, reflects the difficulty. In a D20 system, each number on a dice represents 5%. If you have a DC 20 strength check to, bend some bar in a prison, only a very strong character is going to do that. If you say, well, on a 20, anyone can do it, you say, oh, maybe it was weak or something, but that's only 5%. You didn't got to roll that 20. Whereas a character with an 18 strength has bonuses and whatnot helping them to do that. And then you get into things like, can the players combine their efforts? Again, it depends on the context of what's being attempted, but if they can increase or lower that difficulty check to make that roll, right? The point is, in a lot of situations, in whatever RPG game you're playing, you run into establishing a DC that gets a little murky. I'll use a real life example. Suppose I have a 20-foot 2x6 board, and I put that out in my yard on little bricks, lay them this way along so that it doesn't bend. So it's 3 inches off the ground. And I say, walk across that board 20 feet. Not very difficult, right? You could probably do it. There's a chance you could fall off, especially if you're really clumsy, but most people could just walk across. Suppose I took that same board and I put it across a 1,000-foot deep gorge, right? And let's just say for sake, it stays rigid. It's not bending. It's perfectly rigid, just like it was in the backyard, but a little bit harder, right? Looking down. And you would say, where do you have better odds of crossing that? I'd say in your backyard. And of course, you may have environmental effects that you don't have in your backyard. A wind blowing across the gorge. You might have mists coming up from the raging river below, making the board slick. All sorts of stuff that makes you say, as a player character, I'm not sure I want to cross that board. Because I think the DC on that's going to be tricky. And that, my friends, is context, because that board is exactly the same length and width across the 1,000-foot gorge and across your backyard. And I'm just saying it's not sagging at all, because that would be another environmental effect. And so if you said 80% or even 90% of the average person could walk across that 2x6 board, you're going to start subtracting that percentage based on the height itself. You know, what is because there's a unless you're sort of, a monk or some kind of aerialist or someone who has no fear of heights, but the average person is going to look at that and go, holy cow. Then the wind. And then, so you might get down to maybe it's a 50-50 chance, right? Or even more. Let's say it's DC 12 to cross. You going to take that chance? Because if you fall 1,000 feet, you're dead. So that becomes where I think we're going to go in another way. But of course, after the context, you will be negotiating. I had a situation where these players were in this cave complex built in a volcano, and they came across this area that there was a channel of lava blocking this passage. And one of the players, I think most of the players realized, hey, if we get a running start, it's not very wide. We should be able, just based on the rules, the way they're situated, you can jump this far with a running start. And that should clear the lava thing. And I said, well, actually, there is context here, like there's context with the 2x6 board. You have superheated hot gas in here that you can't breathe it in, and you will be unconscious. And the heat and all this stuff causes really difficult to see. And in fact, if it gets too hot, you're going to just instinctively close your eyes. So now you got to make a con check. This was in a 5e situation, so this is how I did it. But depending on your system, you got to make a con check, and you got to make some kind of a dex check. Dex, or there's other systems, acrobatics, if you're a Pathfinder, whatever that is, because I can't remember all the characters. We had a monk that was pretty easy, although his con wasn't so great. And then other characters with a high con, so you had 2 checks to make in this situation. So the players then negotiated. They said, well, they thought about it. What if we put cloth around here and make it wet, and we put stuff over our eyes, just a little bit showing, and then protect ourselves? And they had all these different ideas about how to do this and what they were wearing and everything. So it started to get lower. So what you're doing is taking a base task. All of these characters had enough, I think it's based on strength, to jump over the lava thing. So that task, they can do that. Then you're adding context. And you're starting with each of these players can do this, but how many of the average PC, right? If you take 11 as your average roll, just a 0 modifier, what percentage could do this, run across this thing and hold their breath as they're running and jumping, not take a breath in and get to the other side and out of the gas? And I think I said because of the severity of this heat and whatnot, I was saying a 25% chance base, right, that you could do this. That's a DC 15. But if you have con bonuses, it's going to go up from there. And then if the players put things on their mouth, they might be able to lower it a couple points. You might have, let's say, a DC 12 or 13, or if you have a good con, something lower. But still, that's less than 50% chance. And then you have to make a dex or acrobatics or whatever in your system where your vision is obscured, you're making this run, and you need to leap at at the right point because you're just making that distance. So now you've got another determination with the average PC that has no modifier. What are the chances that they could make this check? And so the thing here is you've negotiated these. The players have given you ideas to lower this, but they know they have to make 2 rolls. And what I do, especially in a life or death situation, is I tell them, here's the DC on these rolls. And we've based this DC based on the context and our negotiation about what you're doing and what you're trying to, how you're trying to change this. But I set the roll and that's it. You then decide, do I want to make that roll, right? And if you had 2 rolls, because I think they did turn around, because the problem here is if you fall into the lava, like the 1,000-foot gorge, most likely you're dead. 90%, I mean, again, unless you figure out some way to reduce the effect of that lava with a spell or something, right? There might be a way. And again, I'm not even giving the context of the player's abilities here to do other things, to use some kind of fly ability, or I'm just saying they are trying to jump over this lava and they go, you know what? I don't want to have to make 2 rolls. Even though we negotiated it down, the context here is no good for this. It's just the penalty for failure is too severe. So remember, when you're setting DCs for the players, you think about what the task is at hand. How could someone do that, whether it's crossing a board or jumping over something? How difficult is that in and of itself? To me, that's the key to using skill checks, is the context of the check and then a negotiation on what attributes, what skills are the players going to be using to overcome this obstacle or to complete this task. And then what are the modifiers that we can discuss based on the environment, based on that context, and how can the players potentially mitigate them? And of course, a shout out to my Patreon supporters. I really appreciate you guys. Got some interesting things coming out this week. Can't wait to get started on that. And if you like what you've seen, please subscribe, like the video, give me a comment on how you set DCs, if you have different methods or, talking about the context and how much you negotiate or whatever, whether you use them secretly or not. I tend not to. Most importantly, of course, my friends, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose, and tell somebody else about it.